She thought she'd found peace by investing everything in her husband's dream, but she was betrayed, humiliated, and left alone on the verge of giving birth. Now, she's going to show that true strength is born from pain, and it's never invisible. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The rain beat hard against the windows of the small apartment in Astoria, Queens, as Sarah held the yellowed envelope in her trembling hands. Inside were the pension buyout papers she had been waiting for. 34 years old, 12 years as a nurse in the city's public health system, and finally a new beginning. $180,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom. It was security. It was the future of the baby, growing in her 4-month belly, still discreet under the loose blouse she wore to hide the pregnancy from the curious eyes of the neighbors. She leaned her head against the worn-out couch and closed her eyes, allowing herself a rare moment of peace. The morning sickness had passed, but the exhaustion still followed her like a shadow. 12 years of working double shifts, weekends, holidays. 12 years of seeing other people's pain, holding the hands of the fearful, cleaning wounds that went far beyond the flesh. 12 years dedicated to a system that never recognized her as it should have, but which she had served with dignity, because she believed that doing good was worth more than any salary. The house she lived in was a gift from her mother, an inheritance left with love before an illness took away the only person who had always believed in Sarah. It was a simple 2-story house in Astoria, with 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a backyard where her mother used to grow jasmines. Now the flowers were withered, but Sarah planned to revive the garden as soon as the baby was born. She wanted her child to grow up with the scent of jasmines, just as she had. The sound of keys in the door pulled her from her thoughts. Michael came in with his usual tired expression, his white coat still draped over his broad shoulders, his black hair disheveled. He was 45, his face marked by wrinkles that betrayed sleepless nights and endless shifts. He was a doctor at the same hospital where Sarah had worked, but in the general surgery wing, a place where he felt his talent was wasted on routine procedures and Medicaid patients who, according to him, didn't appreciate the care they received. Michael dropped his backpack on the floor and went straight to the kitchen without greeting her. Sarah was already used to this silence, this distance he created whenever he came home from work. She stood up slowly, feeling a slight discomfort in her lower back, and followed him to the kitchen. He had his head inside the refrigerator, looking for something to eat. "Did you have lunch?" she asked, her voice as soft as ever. "Didn't have time," he answered without looking back. "Emergency surgery, 3 hours on my feet, and you know what I get for it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing besides my miserable salary." Sarah sighed. This conversation repeated itself almost every day. Michael was obsessed with the idea that he deserved more, that his talent was being wasted, that the world didn't recognize what he was capable of. She understood his frustration, but sometimes she felt this bitterness was consuming the man she had met 4 years ago when he still smiled, when he still had dreams that weren't driven solely by money and recognition. "I heated up some rice and beans," she said, pointing to the pot on the stove. "There's chicken too." Michael grabbed a plate and sat at the table, eating in silence. Sarah sat in the chair next to him, her hands crossed over her still small belly. She wanted to talk about the baby, about how she was feeling, about the plans she had for the room that would be turned into a nursery, but she knew Michael wasn't in the mood for conversations about pregnancy. He never was. When she had discovered she was pregnant 3 months ago, his reaction had been strange. There was no joy, no hugs, no excited plans for the future. There was only a nod, a dry "okay," and an almost immediate change of subject. Sarah tried not to take it personally. Michael was like that, closed off, pragmatic. She believed that when the baby was born, when he held his child in his arms, everything would change. A father's love would awaken, and they would finally be the family she had always dreamed of having. "My buyout was finalized today," she said, breaking the silence. "I got the papers." Michael looked up from his plate, a flicker of interest crossing his face for the first time that night. "How much was it?" 180,000. He stopped chewing for a second, his eyes narrowing as he calculated mentally. Then he went back to eating, but there was something different in his expression. A contained energy, a spark that Sarah hadn't seen in months. "That's a good amount," he said, his voice a little too casual. "Yeah," she replied, smiling. "I was thinking of saving it for the baby. Open a savings account, maybe invest in something safe. With the house already paid off, we can live comfortably on what you make. We won't have luxury, but we'll have peace." Michael didn't answer. He finished eating, took his plate to the sink and stood there for a moment, looking out the window at the dark backyard. Sarah watched his back, the tension in his shoulders, and a strange feeling began to form in the pit of her stomach. It was a feeling she knew well after so many years working in medical emergencies. It was the premonition that something was about to happen. "Sarah," he said finally, turning to face her, "I have an idea." She waited, her hands still on her belly. "An idea that could change everything for us." Michael pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his eyes shining with an intensity she hadn't seen since they first met. He took her hands, a gesture so rare that Sarah felt her heart speed up. "I'm tired, Sarah. Tired of working for other people. Tired of seeing patients who don't respect me, of taking orders from superiors who don't know half. Of what I know. I deserve more. We deserve more." Sarah nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "I want to open a clinic. Our own clinic. Me in charge, no one to answer to. With the right setup, we can serve a private clientele, people who value a good doctor and are willing to pay for it. I've already done the math, researched the costs. With 180,000, we can rent a small space, buy the basic equipment, and get started." Sarah's heart pounded, but not with excitement. It was fear. Fear of risking everything she had earned with so much sweat. Fear of losing the security she had finally achieved. "Michael, I don't know," she said, her voice hesitant. "It's a lot of money. What if it doesn't work out? We're having a baby in 5 months. I need to think about his future." "That's exactly why we need to do this now," he insisted, squeezing her hands tighter. "Do you want our son to grow up seeing his dad broken, frustrated, working like a slave for the rest of his life? Or do you want him to be proud of me? To see that his dad had the courage to take a risk, to build something of his own?" His words echoed in Sarah's mind. She wanted her son to be proud of his father. She wanted Michael to be happy, to stop coming home with that weight on his shoulders, with that bitterness in his eyes. And more than anything, she wanted to believe they were building something together, that this investment would be for their family, for the future of the 3 of them. "Are you sure it will work?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "I am," he answered without hesitation. "I'm an excellent doctor, Sarah, you know that. People will seek out quality, they'll look for someone who really cares. And I'll give them that. I just need your help to get started." Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. They weren't tears of joy, but of a deep fear she couldn't name. But looking into Michael's eyes, so full of hope and determination, she couldn't say no. She could never say no to him. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's try." The smile that spread across Michael's face was the most genuine she had seen in months. He pulled her into a tight hug, kissing the top of her head with a tenderness she had almost forgotten he was capable of showing. "You won't regret this, Sarah. I promise I'll make it worth it." That night, lying in bed next to a deeply sleeping Michael, Sarah stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. The shadows of the backyard trees danced on the walls, cast by the faint light of the street lamp. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the slight movement of the baby, who was starting to kick more and more. "It's all going to be okay," she whispered, to the child who couldn't yet hear her. "Your dad is going to build something great, and we're going to be happy." But even as she said those words, a part of her didn't quite believe it. A part of her felt she was about to make a mistake that would change everything. The following days passed in a blur of frantic activity. Michael was energized as never before, leaving early and coming back late with papers, contracts, and blueprints of potential locations for the clinic. Sarah, stuck at home as the pregnancy began to weigh more heavily each day, found herself just signing documents he placed in front of her, without fully understanding what she was agreeing to. "I found the perfect place," Michael announced one evening, walking in with a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "It's a commercial space in Park Slope, Brooklyn, near the subway. It has room for 3 offices, a reception area, and a procedure room. The rent is high, but it's worth it. It's a neighborhood with money, people who can pay." Sarah nodded, too tired to ask questions. Her 5-month belly was already starting to bother her when she stood for too long, and the back pain was constant. "We'll need to do some renovations," Michael continued, taking off his jacket and tossing it on the couch. "Nothing too expensive, just the basics to make it presentable. Then we'll buy the equipment, hire a receptionist, and in 2 months we'll be up and running." 2 months, Sarah repeated. "That's tight. I'll be 7 months pregnant." "Don't worry about that," he said, distracted, already scrolling through his phone. "You just need to rest and take care of the baby. I'll handle everything." But the weeks that followed proved that promise was empty. As the clinic began to take shape, with walls being painted, floors being replaced, and furniture being delivered, Michael became increasingly absent. He spent the entire day at the clinic, supervising the work, arguing with suppliers, and adjusting every detail. Sarah, 6 months pregnant and feeling the weight of loneliness, started going to the clinic to see how things were progressing. It was during one of these visits that Michael, sweaty and stressed, pulled her aside and said something that would change everything. "Sarah, I need a favor." She waited, her hand resting on her aching lower back. "Things are more expensive than I thought. The equipment especially, and I can't afford to hire a receptionist right now. The money won't stretch that far. So I was thinking, until we start turning a profit, could you help me out here at the front desk? Just temporarily, until we can afford to hire someone." Sarah looked around at the space still under construction, at the walls smelling of fresh paint, at the future being built with her money. "I'm 6 months pregnant, Michael." I know, but you won't be doing anything heavy, just sitting at the reception desk answering the phone, scheduling appointments, simple stuff. And you can sit the whole time, it'll be easy." There was something in the way he spoke, an urgency in his voice, that made Sarah realize this wasn't a request. It was a necessity. If she said no, the clinic wouldn't open. The entire investment, all the money from her buyout, would be lost. "Just until we hire someone," she said finally. "Just until we hire someone," he repeated, kissing her forehead with relief. "You're amazing, Sarah. I knew I could count on you." The clinic opened on a sunny September morning that seemed to promise good fortune. Michael was radiant, greeting the first few patients with a wide, confident smile. Sarah, sitting behind the reception desk with her 7-month belly hidden by the counter, smiled at the patients and tried not to think about how her feet were already swollen, even though it was only 10 in the morning. The first few months were challenging in ways Sarah hadn't imagined. Patients were few and far between, much fewer than Michael had projected in his optimistic spreadsheets. Entire days would go by without a single appointment. The phone would ring, but it was usually a supplier demanding payment, not a patient booking a visit. The money coming in barely covered the rent and vendor bills. Michael grew increasingly tense, irritable, and distant. He started blaming everyone and everything. The location wasn't good enough. The competition was unfair. Patients didn't understand quality. The marketing wasn't working. But never once did he admit that maybe his plans had been too ambitious, that maybe he should have started smaller, more modestly, more realistically. Sarah, torn between her responsibilities at the front desk and the needs of a pregnancy nearing its end, began to feel an exhaustion that went far beyond the physical. It was a weariness of the soul, an exhaustion that came from waking up every day knowing she would have to feign an optimism she didn't feel, that she would have to smile at patients while her back screamed in pain, that she would have to endure Michael's bad moods in silence, because complaining would only make things worse. She spent her mornings cleaning the clinic before it opened, because they couldn't afford a cleaning service. She spent her afternoons at the reception desk, checking in the few patients who showed up, organizing files and trying to handle basic bookkeeping even though she knew little about finance. She spent her nights at home cooking, doing laundry, and preparing for the next day, with her ever-growing belly making every movement a struggle. Leo, who was now 3, sensed the tension in the air. He became quieter, more withdrawn, asking fewer questions. Sarah saw her son losing some of his natural childhood joy and hated herself for not being able to protect him from it. But what could she do? She had no family to ask for help. She had no money to hire a babysitter. She had no options. So she brought Leo to the clinic on days he didn't have preschool, setting him up in a corner with toys and cartoons, and prayed he would stay quiet enough not to bother the patients. And Leo, being a perceptive child, did. He stayed quiet. He behaved. He became almost invisible, because he was already learning, even at such a young age, that he had to adapt, that he had to be convenient, that his needs came after everything and everyone else. It was a terrible lesson to teach a child, and Sarah knew it, but she didn't know how to avoid it. When her labor began on a cold November night, Sarah was home alone, organizing clinic paperwork that Michael had asked her to review. Leo was asleep in his room, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. The contractions started strong and fast, much more intense than she remembered from her first delivery. She had to call a cab herself, pack her bag herself, wake Leo, and quickly leave him with the neighbor, who, thank God, was home and didn't ask questions, and go to the hospital alone. The cab driver, a man in his 60s, with graying hair, looked at her in the rearview mirror with concern as she got in, panting. "Are you okay, Mum? Isn't your husband coming with you?" "He's working," Sarah lied, because it was easier than explaining the truth, that her husband was at the clinic, dealing with some problem with a supplier, and hadn't even answered the 5 calls she'd made before giving up and calling the cab. The hospital was crowded, as it always was at that time of year. Sarah was taken to a pre-labor room where other women were also waiting, some with husbands holding their hands, others with mothers or sisters offering words of comfort. Sarah was alone, timing her contractions, breathing as she had learned in the birthing classes she took during her first pregnancy, trying not to think about the fact that her husband wasn't there. The baby was born at 3 in the morning, a healthy 7.5-pound boy who cried loudly as soon as he entered the world, announcing his arrival with vigor. Sarah held her son in her arms and cried too, from pain, from relief, and from a deep sadness she couldn't explain. She looked at the baby's small, perfect face, at his closed eyes, at his clenched fists, and whispered, "I'm sorry, my son. I'm sorry you had to be born like this, with Mommy all alone, without Daddy here to meet you. But I promise I'll love you enough for both of us. I promise I'll do everything I can to make you happy." Michael arrived at the hospital at 7 in the morning, with dark circles under his eyes and a mechanical apology that sounded empty even to his own ears. "Sorry, Sarah. I couldn't get away sooner. I had to close out the register, check inventory, and fix some problems with the scheduling system that crashed." Sarah didn't even respond. She just looked at him, saw the distance in his eyes, the absence of any genuine emotion, and understood that this was the future, that she would have to get used to the loneliness, to the feeling of raising her children alone even while married. He looked at the baby, lightly touched the head covered in dark hair, and said he was handsome. He said he looked like him, which Sarah found ironic, because Michael had barely looked at the child long enough to form an opinion. Then he said he had to go, that he had appointments scheduled for that morning that he couldn't cancel because they needed the money. "Go," Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Go to work. We'll be fine here." He hesitated for a second, as if he were about to say something, but then just nodded and left the room, leaving behind the scent of his expensive cologne and an emptiness that seemed to fill the space he had vacated. Sarah stayed in the hospital for 2 days because she developed a slight postpartum fever that the doctors wanted to monitor. During those 2 days, Michael visited her once for 15 minutes, bringing flowers hastily bought from the shop across the street and an expression of someone fulfilling an unpleasant social obligation. When she was discharged and went home, Michael wasn't there to pick her up. He sent a text saying he had an emergency surgery and that she should get a cab, and he would reimburse her later. Sarah took the cab with Leo and the baby, paid with the last few dollars she had in her wallet, and walked into her house feeling a weight in her chest that had nothing to do with the physical exhaustion of childbirth. Sarah named her son Leo in honor of the father she had never known. Michael agreed with a shrug, as if the name didn't really matter, and maybe to him it didn't. The maternity leave Sarah had hoped for never came. 2 weeks after giving birth, still recovering, Michael appeared in her bedroom with an expression of someone coming to collect a debt. "Sarah, I need you to come back to the front desk. I can't handle it alone." "I just had a baby, Michael." "I know, but we don't have a choice. Bring Leo with you. He can stay in his stroller at the reception desk. You can breastfeed during breaks. It'll work." And so Sarah found herself, 3 weeks after giving birth, sitting at the clinic's reception desk again, with her son sleeping in a makeshift bassinet next to her. She attended to patients with breasts sore from accumulated milk, changed diapers between appointments, and rocked Leo when he cried, all while Michael saw patients in his office as if none of it was his responsibility. Months turned into years. The temporary arrangement never ended. Sarah, who should have been resting, caring for her son, and reclaiming her life, found herself trapped in a routine that consumed every drop of her energy. She cleaned the clinic before opening, checked in patients, handled basic bookkeeping, organized files, and still cared for Leo, who grew up in that work environment as if it were the most natural place in the world. Michael, meanwhile, reaped the rewards. Patients praised him for his dedication, his competence, the way he treated them with attention and care. They asked about the clinic, about how he had managed to build such a well-organized business. And he always answered with a proud smile, talking about his entrepreneurial vision, the sacrifices he had made, how hard it was to work for himself. He never mentioned Sarah. He never said she was the one who kept everything running. He never acknowledged that without her the clinic would have closed its doors in the first month, and Sarah, too tired to fight, too sad to confront him, accepted that silence as another part of her life that had transformed into something she no longer recognized. She looked at Leo, who was now 3 and playing with toy cars in the corner of the reception area, and wondered what kind of mother she was being, what kind of woman she had become. It was on a Friday afternoon, when Leo had a slight fever and Sarah had asked to leave early, that Michael called her in for a talk. He was sitting in his office with a serious expression she couldn't decipher. "Sarah, sit down. I need to talk to you about something important." She sat, her heart tight, Leo asleep in her arms. "The clinic is doing well. Very well, actually. Better than I imagined. And I was thinking about expanding, opening a second location, bigger in an even better neighborhood. The Upper East Side, maybe, or Soho, a place where we can serve an even more sophisticated clientele." Sarah said nothing. She just looked at him, waiting for what would come next. "But for that I need capital. I need collateral to get a bank loan. And I was thinking, we could use the house as collateral. It's a paid-off property. It'll make getting the credit approved much easier." "The house," Sarah repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, your mom's house. Our house. I know. It has sentimental value, but think about it, Sarah. If the second clinic works out, and it will, we'll be able to buy an even better house. A bigger place, with a real backyard for Leo to play in. It'll be good for all of us." Sarah looked at her sleeping son, felt the weight of his small body in her arms, and thought of her mother's house, of the walls that held memories of a simple but happy childhood, of the backyard where the jasmines grew, of the kitchen where her mother used to bake cakes on Sundays. "I don't know, Michael. It's a lot. It's the only thing I have left from my mom." "I understand, Sarah, but think about the future. Think about Leo. We're building something here, something big. And to build something big, sometimes you have to take risks. You took a risk with me once and it paid off. Trust me one more time." And Sarah, too exhausted to fight, too afraid that everything would fall apart if she said no, nodded. She nodded because she no longer knew how to say no, because she had lost the ability to defend her own boundaries. "Okay," she said, her voice weak. "Let's sign." Michael smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and picked up the papers that were already prepared on his desk, as if he had known from the beginning that she would agree, and in that moment, As she signed her name on the documents that put her mother's house up as collateral for a loan she didn't even know the amount of, Sarah felt something break inside her. It was a small, almost imperceptible sensation, like a thin branch snapping under the weight of snow. But it was there. The beginning of a crack that over time would become a chasm. That night, after Michael fell asleep, Sarah went back to the kitchen. She made a cup of chamomile tea, just as her mother used to do in moments of distress, and sat at the table where so many important conversations of her life had taken place. It was at that table that her mother told her she was sick. It was at that table that she studied for her nursing board exams. It was at that table that years ago she told her mother she had met a doctor named Michael and thought she was falling in love. Her mother had never really liked Michael from the start. She never said it outright because she wasn't the type to interfere in her daughter's choices, but Sarah could see it in the silences, the glances, the careful questions she asked. "Does he treat you well, honey? Are you happy with him? Does he respect you?" Sarah always answered yes, convinced her mother was being overprotective, that she didn't understand how ambitious and determined Michael was, qualities she admired. Now, sitting alone in the silent kitchen, Sarah wondered if her mother hadn't seen something she herself had refused to see. If those silences weren't disapproval but concern, if those questions weren't intrusive but protective. She picked up her phone and opened the photo gallery. She had a special folder dedicated to her mother, with scanned images of old photographs. Her mother as a young woman in her 20s, smiling at the camera in a polka-dot dress. Her mother holding baby Sarah, her eyes full of love and hope. Her mother in the backyard, tending to the jasmines she loved so much, her apron stained with dirt, the peaceful smile of someone who found joy in simple things. "I miss you, Mom," Sarah whispered to the phone screen, the tears finally falling. "I need you so much right now. I need you to tell me I'm doing the right thing, or to tell me I'm making a terrible mistake. I need your wisdom, your comfort, your voice telling me everything will be okay." But her mother was no longer there, and Sarah would have to make this decision alone, like so many others, since she was orphaned at 28. She drank her tea slowly, feeling the warm liquid go down her throat, trying to calm the storm of anxiety growing in her chest. Tomorrow they would go to the bank. Tomorrow the house would become collateral for a dream that was Michael's, not hers. Tomorrow she would risk the only solid thing she had in her life. But what could she do? Saying no would mean the end of the clinic before it even began. It would mean losing the entire investment, the $180,000 that had already been spent on renovations and equipment. It would mean watching Michael fail, and she knew a failed Michael would be an even more bitter, more distant, more impossible man to live with. So she would say yes, because it was easier to say yes than to face the consequences of no, because she hoped that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. This time, he would see her value. This time, he would recognize her as a true partner. But deep down, in a part of her she didn't want to listen to, Sarah already knew the truth. She knew she was walking down a one-way street. She knew she was giving up her security, her autonomy, her identity for a man who saw her only as a tool to achieve his own goals. And even knowing this, she would still sign the papers, because love, or what she believed was love, had made her blind, and hope, even foolish, unfounded hope, was easier to carry than the painful truth. Sarah finished her tea, washed the cup, and went back to her room. She lay down next to Michael, who was snoring softly, completely oblivious to the anguish of the woman sharing his bed. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby move, and made a silent promise. "I will protect you, little one. No matter what happens, no matter how much I have to sacrifice, I will make sure you grow up safe and loved. You will have everything I didn't. You will have a present father, even if I have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders to make it happen." It was a beautiful promise, a sincere promise. But it was also an impossible promise to keep, because Sarah still didn't understand that you can't make someone be what they are not, that you can't turn selfishness into generosity through sacrifice, that sometimes protecting the ones you love also means protecting yourself. But those lessons would come later. For now, Sarah still believed in the illusion, and that illusion would carry her through the next few years, sustaining her through humiliation and abandonment until the day the illusion shattered completely, leaving her at rock bottom, forcing her to choose between giving up or rising again. She would choose to rise again, but there was still a long way to go. There was still so much pain to endure, so many tears to shed, so many sleepless nights to face. For now, there was only the silence of the night, the weight of the baby growing in her belly, and the persistent feeling that she was about to make the costliest mistake of her life. And she was right. The second clinic opened with a gala that seemed straight out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare disguised as a fairy tale. Sarah was 8 months pregnant with their second child, a pregnancy that had been even more difficult than the first, marked by high blood pressure and an exhaustion that seemed to suck every last drop of energy from her. But that night, she wanted to believe it was all worth it, that all the sacrifice, all the pain, all the exhaustion had a greater purpose. The clinic was on the Upper East Side, one of New York's most exclusive neighborhoods, in a modern high-rise with a glass facade and a 24-hour doorman. The investment had been massive, far beyond what Sarah had imagined when she signed the papers using the house as collateral. Michael had hired an architect for the interior design, chosen imported furniture and installed state-of-the-art equipment. Everything had to be perfect, he said. Everything had to scream excellence. Sarah wore a navy blue dress she had bought at a discount store downtown, the only one she could find that fit over her large belly and didn't cost a fortune. She had gone shopping alone on a Saturday morning after leaving Leo with a neighbor. She had wandered through several stores, trying on dozens of dresses, feeling increasingly disheartened by what she saw in the mirror. Her body was swollen, tired, and marked by pregnancy and stress. Nothing looked the way she wanted. When she finally found that navy blue dress, simple but dignified, she bought it without a second. Thought, even knowing it was money they couldn't really spare from their tight home budget, because she needed it. She needed to feel presentable, to believe she could stand by Michael's side on this important night without looking completely out of place. At home, before leaving for the opening, she spent hours getting ready. She did her own nails because she couldn't afford a salon. She carefully styled her hair, pulling it into a low bun that hid the roots that needed a touch-up. She applied light makeup, trying to conceal the deep dark circles under her eyes. When she was done, she looked in the mirror and saw a woman she didn't fully recognize. It was her, but a faded, exhausted version, aged beyond her years. It wasn't as elegant as she would have liked. It didn't have the perfect fit, but it was dignified. It was the best she could do with the tight budget she had for herself, since every penny the family had went to the clinic. Leo, now 4, stood beside her in slacks and a white shirt that Sarah had carefully ironed that afternoon. The boy held tightly to his mother's hand, his eyes wide at the crowd of well-dressed people mingling in the brightly lit space of the new clinic. There were waiters serving champagne and canapes, a small orchestra playing classical music in the corner, and expensive flowers decorating every available surface. Michael was at the center of it all, impeccable in an expensive grey suit, his hair perfectly styled, smiling and greeting guests as if he owned the world. Well-known doctors from the area had come, some local business owners, insurance company representatives, and even a city councilman whom Michael had managed to invite through an influential patient. Sarah stood in the corner of the new reception area, watching everything with a mix of pride and melancholy. She had helped build this. Every brick of this clinic held a piece of her, her work, her money, her sweat. But as she watched Michael receive everyone's congratulations, as she saw him shine under the spotlight, she felt strangely invisible. Leo tugged at her hand, tired of standing still. "Mommy, can I go get a little cake?" "You can, sweetie, but just one, okay? And don't leave my sight." The boy ran to the dessert table with the typical energy of a child, and Sarah felt a sharp pain in her belly. It wasn't a contraction, just the baby moving forcefully, its little feet kicking her ribs. She placed a hand on the spot, breathing deeply, trying to ease the discomfort. That's when she saw her. Michael was talking to a woman Sarah didn't know. She was young, probably around 30, with blonde hair pulled back in an elegant bun, a tight red dress that highlighted a perfect figure, and high heels that made her seem even more imposing. She was smiling at Michael in a way that made something twist in Sarah's stomach. And Michael was smiling back with that sparkle in his eyes she hadn't seen in years when he looked at her. One of the guests, an older woman Sarah recognized as a long-time patient from the first clinic, approached her with a kind smile. "What a beautiful party, isn't it? Dr. Michael is truly a man of vision." "He is," Sarah agreed, forcing a smile. "And who is that young woman over there? The one in red? She seems quite close to him." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "I don't know, she must be a medical colleague." The woman nodded, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. She patted Sarah's arm and walked away, leaving her alone again with her turbulent thoughts. The night wore on in a blur of fake smiles and empty conversations. Sarah tried to approach Michael several times, but he was always busy, always had someone more important to talk to. Leo started to get fussy and sleepy, and she had to take him to a back room so he could rest on a couch. It was when she was returning to the main hall that she heard voices coming from the hallway. It was Michael and the woman in red, talking in low tones near the door of one of the offices. Sarah stopped, hidden behind a decorative column, her heart beginning to pound. There was something in the way they spoke, in the proximity of their bodies, in the intimacy of their tone that set off an alarm in her mind. "You've done an incredible job here," the woman was saying, her voice smooth and complimentary, with an almost sensual texture that made Sarah's stomach churn. "This is exactly the kind of environment I was looking for to start my partnership. And not just a professional one, Michael, you know that. Partnership." The word echoed in Sarah's mind like an alarm bell, but it was the second part, that comment about it not being just professional, that made everything click into place with painful, devastating clarity. "Thank you, Veronica." Michael's voice had a softness that Sarah hadn't heard directed at her in years. "I knew you'd like it. And with you coming on as a partner in both the business and my life, we'll be able to expand even further. Maybe open a third location next year. Maybe even think about franchising. The sky's the limit when you have someone by your side who truly gets you." Partner. Sarah felt her legs give way. She leaned against the wall, her free hand instinctively going to her belly where Sophia was kicking hard, as if the baby could also feel her mother's terror. He had a partner, a female partner, a partner who was clearly much more than just a business associate. "I'm excited," the woman named Veronica continued. And from her angle, Sarah could see her place a hand on Michael's arm, a touch that was far too intimate, far too familiar. "I've already started making calls, spreading the word to my patient network. I think we're going to make a great team, in every sense. And I can't wait until we can finally make this public. You promised tonight would be the night." Michael laughed, a sound Sarah recognized perfectly. It was the laugh he used when he was flirting, when he was interested, when he was winning someone over. She knew that laugh because he used to use it with her, years ago when they were just getting to know each other, when he was still pretending she mattered. "Of course," he replied, and then Sarah saw something that made her world crumble completely. He leaned in and kissed Veronica. It wasn't a casual kiss, not a friendly one. It was a deep, passionate kiss, the kind that only exists between two people who are intimate, who share a bed, who have built a relationship that goes far beyond the professional. Sarah couldn't keep watching. She walked back to the main hall with trembling legs, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, her vision blurred by tears she forced herself to hold back because she wouldn't give Michael the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart in public. She sat in a chair in the corner, trying to calm herself, trying to understand what this all meant. Michael had a partner she didn't know, a partner he had never mentioned a single word about. And from what Sarah had just overheard, that partnership was already in motion, already decided, planned and established, without her knowledge, without her having a say. She looked down at her own belly, at the child about to be born, and felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. It was the nausea of realizing she had been living in an illusion, that the clinic was never hers, that the future she had imagined was being built by other hands, and she was just a spectator. Or worse, an employee. An employee who didn't even get paid. The official ceremony began around 10 o'clock. A small stage was set up in front of the reception desk with a microphone and a makeshift podium. Michael stepped onto the stage with the confidence of someone born for it, and the crowd gathered around, champagne glasses in hand, expectant smiles on their faces. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice echoing through the space. "I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. This is a very special moment for me. It's the realization of a dream I started building 5 years ago when I decided I no longer wanted to work for others, that I wanted to have my own clinic, my own business, my own professional identity." Sarah was at the back of the room, Leo asleep in her arms, heavy and warm against her chest. She heard every word Michael said, and with each sentence she felt a piece of herself disappear. "It wasn't easy," he continued. "There were times I thought about giving up, moments when fear tried to paralyze me, but I persisted. I believed in myself, in my ability, in my talent, and today I'm here, opening this second clinic, certain that I made the right choice." Applause filled the room. Sarah didn't applaud. Her hands were busy holding her son, but even if they were free, she wouldn't have had the strength to clap. "And I couldn't be here without the help of a very special person," Michael said. And for a second, a brief, foolish second, Sarah thought he was going to mention her. That finally, after 5 years of silence, he was going to acknowledge her publicly. But then he extended his hand and Veronica stepped onto the stage, radiant in her red dress, and Sarah felt the world collapse around her. "This is Dr. Veronica Miller," Michael announced, putting his arm around her shoulders in a way that was far too intimate, far too familiar. "She's a gynecologist, a graduate of NYU specializing in high-risk pregnancies, and as of today she is my partner in this new clinic." More applause. Veronica smiled, waving to the crowd like a queen waving to her subjects. "Veronica shares my vision of offering excellent care," Michael continued. "She understands the importance of creating an environment where patients feel valued, where they receive not just medical treatment, but attention, care, and respect. And I am certain that together we will take this clinic to a level I could never have reached alone." Sarah left the room before the tears could fall. She carried Leo to the car, an old Honda Civic she had been driving since before she met Michael, and sat in the driver's seat with her son asleep in the back. She rested her forehead on the steering wheel and let the tears come, silent and bitter. 5 years. 5 years of unpaid labor. 5 years keeping the clinic running. 5 years of sacrifice, of exhaustion, of giving up on herself. And in the end, she was nothing. Not a partner, not an associate. Her name wasn't on any contract. She had no right to anything. She was invisible. The crying was interrupted by a knock on the window. Sarah lifted her head, wiping the tears with the back of her hand, and saw Michael outside, his expression impatient. "What are you doing out here? The party's not over yet." Sarah opened the car door slowly, her legs barely able to support her. "Leo's tired. I needed to get him away from the noise." Michael glanced at his sleeping son in the back seat and sighed. "You could have waited a little longer. It's important for people to see you, for them to know I have a family." "Oh, really? Because in there you didn't seem very interested in people knowing about me. You didn't even mention me, Michael, not once." He narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening. "Don't start with the drama, Sarah. Today is an important day for me." "For you," she repeated, her voice trembling. "Always for you. And what about me? What am I in all of this? You're my wife, the mother of my children. You know that." "Partner," she said, the word coming out like an accusation. "You have a partner. A partner I didn't even know existed." Michael ran a hand through his hair, clearly irritated. "Veronica is an investor. She brought in capital for the second clinic. This is business, Sarah. It has nothing to do with you." "Nothing to do with me. This clinic was built with my money, with my pension buyout, with my mother's house as collateral, and you're telling me it has nothing to do with me." People started leaving the clinic, looking curiously at the scene. Michael noticed and lowered his voice, moving closer to her. "Go home, Sarah. We'll talk about this tomorrow." "No," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "We'll talk about this now. I want to No, what's going on? I want to know why you never made me a partner. Why my name isn't on any documents, why I've been working for free for 5 years while you bring in someone else to be your business partner. Michael looked around, seeing more people watching, and grabbed Sarah's arm tightly, pulling her away from the prying eyes. He led her to a dark corner of the parking lot, away from the building's lights. You want to know why? Because you have no value, Sarah. Because you haven't evolved. You stood still while I grew, while I developed, while I built something real. You're just a retired nurse with nothing to offer but manual labor. The words hit her like physical blows. Sarah took a step back, her hand flying to her belly as if to protect the baby from the cruelty she was hearing. Manual labor, she repeated, her voice faint. Is that what I am to you? That's what you've always been. You're inferior, Sarah, and I need someone by my side who's on my level. Someone who understands business, who has ambition, who can help me grow. Not someone who complains and cries because she didn't get a compliment. He pulled an envelope from his inner jacket pocket and handed it to her. Inside, Sarah saw official papers, papers she immediately recognized as divorce documents. Her heart stopped for a second, then raced in a chaotic rhythm that made her head spin. I've already filed, he said, his voice cold and calculated, as if he were closing a bad deal, not ending a 4-year marriage. The clinic is mine. Both clinics are in my name, because legally, they are mine. You get the house, which is probably full of debt anyway because of the loan you signed for. Consider that your share of the settlement. Sign the papers and we can end this without too much drama. No expensive lawyers, no court battles, no tarnishing our names. You agree to everything. I'll pay a minimal child support for the kids, and we each go our own way. Sarah held the envelope with trembling hands. The pain in her chest was so intense she could barely breathe. It felt as if someone had plunged a knife between her ribs and was twisting it slowly, methodically. You're doing this now, today, at the opening of the clinic that was built with my money. I'm 8 months pregnant with your child, Michael, your daughter. Precisely, he replied, and there was a coldness in his eyes that was more terrifying than any anger. I don't want the baby to be born into all this tension. It's better to sort it out now, clear the air, get everything settled. You go home, take care of the kids, live your simple little life, and I'll handle the business. It's simpler this way. It's better for everyone. Especially for you, because let's be honest, Sarah, you're not capable of more than that anyway. He turned to leave, but Sarah grabbed his arm. Michael, please, we can talk about this properly. We can try to work it out another way. He looked at her hand on his arm, as if it was something disgusting, and shook it off with a sharp movement. There is no other way, I've already decided, and you'll see it's for the best. You never had the capacity to be by my side at this level. Michael walked back to the party, leaving Sarah alone in the dark parking lot, holding the divorce papers and feeling her world fall apart. She managed to get into the car, drive home on autopilot, and carry Leo inside to put him to bed. It was only when she was alone in the bathroom, looking at her own reflection in the mirror, that she realized she was having contractions. Strong, regular contractions, getting closer and closer. The baby was coming. She called Michael. Once, twice, 3 times. He didn't answer. She called a neighbor, asking for help. The woman rushed over, frightened, and drove her to the hospital while another neighbor stayed with Leo. The birth was fast and painful. There was no time for an epidural, no time for preparation. The child came into the world screaming, and Sarah screamed with her, pushing out not just the baby but all the pain, all the anger, all the humiliation she had swallowed for years. It was a girl, small, red, perfect. Sarah held her in her arms and cried. She cried for the daughter who had just been born into a world where her father wasn't present. She cried for Leo, who would have to grow up with separated parents. She cried for herself, for the woman she had been and who now seemed lost somewhere in the past. Michael showed up at the hospital the next day, with hastily bought flowers and an awkward smile. He looked at the baby, commented that she was pretty, and asked what name Sarah had chosen. Sophia, she said, her voice emotionless. Nice, he agreed. He stood there for a few minutes, clearly uncomfortable, and then said he had to go, that he had surgery scheduled. The papers, Michael. Do you still want me to sign the papers?" He hesitated, then nodded. "It's for the best, Sarah." "Fine," she said, looking at her sleeping daughter in her arms. "I'll sign, but you're going to regret this. One day you'll see what you lost." Michael laughed, a bitter sound. "What I lost?" "Sarah, I won. I have 2 clinics, a competent partner, a brilliant future ahead of me. You're the one who lost. You're the one who got left behind." He left the room and Sarah was alone with Sophia, feeling a mix of despair and determination growing inside her. Michael thought she had lost. He thought she was inferior, incapable, insignificant. But he was wrong, and she was going to prove it. She didn't know. How she didn't know when, but she was going to prove that she was so much more than he had ever imagined. She was going to rebuild herself. She was going to rise up. She was going to show him that he hadn't destroyed her. He had only set her free. The following days were a blur of physical and emotional pain. Sarah's body ached from the emergency C-section she'd had due to complications during labor. Every movement was agony. Every time she had to get up to pick up Sophia, every trip to the bathroom, every attempt to turn over, in bed. And the emotional pain was even worse, an open wound that bled constantly, reminding her every second that her life had completely fallen apart. The nurses at the hospital were kind, but there was a certain pity in their eyes that Sarah hated. They had seen Michael arrive late, stay for a short time and leave quickly. They had noticed his absence during crucial moments, and Sarah knew they were drawing conclusions, making silent judgments about a marriage that was clearly in pieces. When she was discharged 3 days after the birth, Sarah had to call a cab again. Michael sent a text saying he was busy with an emergency surgery, that he couldn't pick her up and that she should get a cab and keep the receipt for reimbursement. She didn't even reply. She just called the cab, took Sophia wrapped in the hospital's pink blanket, and went home, taking with her the divorce papers Michael had left on the bedside table, as if they were just another unimportant document. At home, she found Leo being looked after by her neighbor, Mrs. Davis, who had been an angel during those days. The older woman hugged Sarah, carefully, sensing her physical fragility, and said in a soft but firm voice, "You're strong, honey, stronger than you think, and you're not alone. I'm right next door. Anything you need, just call." Sarah thanked her with a nod, not trusting her own voice to speak without breaking down. She took Leo by the hand, went inside and closed the door, shutting herself off from the outside world with her 2 children and her overwhelming pain. The first nights were the worst. Sophia cried with colic, and Sarah, exhausted and sore, would walk with her through the house at 3 in the morning, rocking her, humming lullabies her own mother used to sing. Leo would also wake up from his sister's crying and ask for water, for a hug, for attention that Sarah could barely give, torn between 2 children who needed her simultaneously. And through it all, the divorce papers sat on the kitchen table, a constant reminder of the betrayal, the humiliation, the life that had been destroyed. Sarah would look at them and feel the urge to rip them up, to burn them, to make them disappear. But she knew it wouldn't change anything. The reality was relentless. Michael no longer wanted to be married to her. And maybe, just maybe, that was a blessing disguised as a tragedy. The first few months after the divorce were the darkest of Sarah's life. She was alone in a house that no longer felt like hers, with 2 small children, no job, no money, and no prospects. The bills began to pile up like a silent but deadly avalanche. Water, electricity, gas, property taxes, the mortgage payments for the loan Michael had taken out using the house as collateral. Everything was in her name, everything was her responsibility because Michael had made sure no clinic documents mentioned her. Leo was 5 and asked 1,000 questions about why his dad didn't live with them anymore, why he only visited every other weekend, why everything had changed. Sarah didn't know how to explain to a child that his father considered her inferior, that the love she thought existed was just an illusion built on convenience and exploitation. Sophia was a calm baby, but she needed constant attention. Sarah breastfed, changed diapers, rocked her to sleep during sleepless nights, and tried not to think about the future, because when she thought about the future, all she saw was a bottomless black pit. The child support Michael paid was minimal, calculated based on a salary he declared as much lower than what he actually earned. $400 per child, $800 in total to support 2 children, pay the bills for an entire house, and buy food, diapers, and medicine. Sarah tried to get back into the job market as a nurse. She updated her resume, applied for positions, and went to interviews whenever she could leave the kids with the neighbor who took pity on her. But the answer was always the same. She was out of date. 5 years out of the hospital system meant protocols had changed, equipment was different, and practices were no longer the same. On top of that, at 39 with 2 young children, employers saw her as a risk. Someone who would miss a lot of work, who wouldn't be available for shifts, who was too old to adapt to the frantic pace of hospitals. Too old. At 39, she was considered too old. The words echoed in her mind like a professional death sentence. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw the deep, dark circles, the hair starting to show grey strands, the skin that had lost its glow, the body that still hadn't fully recovered from her second pregnancy. She felt old, tired, used, discarded. It was when the first letter from the bank arrived that Sarah realized the gravity of her situation. The loan Michael had taken out was overdue. 3 missed payments. If she didn't get it current within 60 days, the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings. She could lose the house, her mother's house, the only place that was still hers, the only piece of solid ground in a world that was crumbling around her. Sarah called Michael in a panic. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice impatient. "What, Sarah? I'm in surgery." "The loan. You said you would make the payments. The bank is calling. I'm going to lose the house." Silence on the other end of the line. Then an irritated sigh. "I'm having financial problems too, Sarah. The new clinic is demanding a lot of investment. I can't pay your share right now." "My share? The loan was for your business. The house is the collateral. And the divorce gave you the house. It's your responsibility now. You figure it out." He hung up before she could respond. Sarah stood in the kitchen, the phone still in her hand, feeling a rage so intense that her hands trembled. He had thrown her to the wolves, deliberately, cruelly, without a shred of remorse. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Davis, a 70-year-old woman who lived next door, who gave her the first glimmer of hope. She knocked on Sarah's door on a rainy afternoon, carrying a container of food and a proposal. "Honey, I know you're going through a tough time. You can't hide these things when you live wall to wall, you know. And I wanted to offer you a job. My friend Mrs. Peterson needs someone to take care of her. She's 82, lives alone, and her kids want to hire a caregiver. It's not a lot of money, $800 a week, but it's something. And you have experience, you're a nurse. What do you think?" $800 a week, $3,200 a month. It was more than Sarah got in child support. It was the difference between losing the house and being able to pay the bills. "I'll take it," she said without hesitation. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow, if you can. Mrs. Peterson is eagerly waiting." Sarah managed to arrange a system with Mrs. Davis and another neighbor to watch Leo and Sophia during the day. She would wake up at 5 in the morning, get the kids ready, drop Leo off at school and Sophia with the neighbor, and take the bus to Mrs. Peterson's house in Flushing. An hour-long trip she made standing, squeezed between other workers also struggling to survive. Mrs. Peterson was a frail woman with completely white hair tied in a loose bun and watery blue eyes that seemed to hold decades of stories. She lived in an old house with furniture from the 60s and yellowed photographs on the walls, showing a family that rarely visited. In the first few days, Mrs. Peterson was suspicious, almost hostile. She didn't need a caregiver, she said. She could manage on her own. Her children were overreacting, too worried. But Sarah, with the patience she had developed, caring for difficult patients for years, slowly won her trust. She did more than just give her medicine on time or help her bathe. She talked. She listened to stories about her life, about the husband who had passed away 15 years ago, about the children who were too busy with their own lives to visit their mother often. She cooked the dishes Mrs. Peterson liked, tidied the house with care, and read the newspaper aloud because the old woman's eyesight was failing. And something strange began to happen. In caring for Mrs. Peterson, Sarah began to care for herself too. Every morning she got up before sunrise. Every crowded bus she endured, every "thank you, dear" she heard from Mrs. Peterson, was like a small piece of herself being reclaimed. She wasn't inferior. She wasn't incapable. She was an exceptional caregiver, and Mrs. Peterson blossomed under her care. The woman who used to spend her days sitting in an armchair watching TV now took short walks in the backyard, helped Sarah cook, and smiled more. It was Mrs. Peterson's daughter, Jessica, who noticed the transformation. She showed up for a Sunday visit and barely recognized her mother. "She's radiant," Jessica told Sarah, with tears in her eyes. "I haven't seen my mother like this in years. What are you doing?" "I'm just taking care of her," Sarah replied, not fully understanding the impact she was having. "No, you're giving her life back." Jessica held Sarah's hands firmly. "I need to talk to you. Have you ever thought about doing this professionally? I mean, officially?" Sarah blinked, confused. "I am doing this with your mother." "No, I mean for a company I'm helping to set up. Medical tourism. Foreign patients come to the US for surgeries, treatments, and they need care during their recovery. We need people like you with nursing experience and this ability for human connection, a steady salary, full benefits, the works." Sarah felt her heart race. A real job, with benefits, a steady salary. It sounded too good to be true. "But I don't speak any other languages," she said, already imagining the door closing before it had fully opened. "But you speak English, and many of our patients are from Latin America. Argentinians, Colombians, Peruvians. They speak Spanish. Do you understand Spanish?" Sarah thought of the Mexican and Argentinian soap operas she used to watch with her mother as a child. She understood enough, though she had never needed to use it. "I understand it, I don't speak." "Well, but I understand." Jessica smiled. "Then you're hired. Can you start next week?" And just like that, in a way Sarah could never have imagined, her life began to change. The job in medical tourism was challenging but rewarding. She started by caring for Argentinian patients who came to New York for plastic surgery, and her combination of technical competence and genuine empathy made them feel safe and welcome in a foreign country. She learned to communicate better in Spanish, borrowing books from the library, watching movies, and practicing with patients who were patient with her mistakes. She was terrible with formal grammar, but she had a natural intuition for communication, an ability to make people feel understood even when the words didn't come out perfectly. Word of mouth began to work in her favor. Patients returned to their countries and recommended the service, specifically asking for Sarah to be assigned as their caregiver. The company recognized her value and raised her salary. After 6 months, she was earning double what she had started with. With the extra money, Sarah was able to catch up on the overdue loan payments. She paid off the delinquent utility bills. She renovated the bathroom that had been leaking for years. She bought new clothes for Leo and Sophia, not from a thrift store but brand new with the tag still on. And for the first time since her separation, she bought something for herself. A dress. It wasn't expensive, not designer, but it was beautiful. It was light blue with a small floral print, and it had a cut that flattered her body, which was finally returning to a healthy shape. She tried it on at home, looked at herself in the mirror and cried. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of recognition. The woman looking back at her in the mirror wasn't the broken Sarah that Michael had left behind. She was a new version, stronger, more resilient. She was someone who had walked through hell and come out the other side, still standing. Leo noticed the change too. "Mommy, you're happier," he said one night as she tucked him into bed. "I am, sweetie. Mommy is finding herself again." "What does that mean?" "It means I was lost for a while, but now I know who I am, and I like this person." A year after starting, at the medical tourism company, Jessica called her in for a meeting. "Sarah, you've transformed this service. The patients love you. You have a 98% satisfaction rate, and I was thinking, I want to offer you a partnership." Sarah didn't quite understand. "A partnership?" "Yes, a stake in the company's profits. You wouldn't just be an employee, you'd be a partner, with a voice in decisions, with your name on the company documents. What do you think?" Sarah gripped the edge of the table, her legs suddenly weak. After everything she had been through, after working for 5 years, for free, being erased, made invisible and discarded, someone was offering her what should have been hers from the beginning: recognition, value, dignity. "I accept," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I accept." Jessica smiled and extended her hand. "Welcome to the partnership, Sarah." They shook hands, and Sarah felt something light up inside her chest. It was hope. It was pride. It was the certainty that she was not inferior, that she never had been. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Michael was facing his own demons. The Upper East Side clinic, which was supposed to be his great triumph, was turning into a financial nightmare. Veronica, the partner he had introduced with such pride, demanded constant renovations, increasingly expensive equipment, and aggressive marketing campaigns that consumed resources without bringing the expected returns. His traditional clientele, who had trusted Michael for years, began to drift away. They didn't recognize themselves in that clinic full of pomp and luxury. They wanted the accessible doctor who treated them with attention, not the distant businessman who barely had time to look them in the eye. Employees started to quit. They complained of excessive pressure, a toxic work environment, and broken promises. The clinic's online reviews plummeted. Patients left negative comments about cold service, rushed doctors, and exorbitant bills. Michael tried to fix it, to turn the situation around, but it was like trying to hold water in his hands. The tighter he squeezed, the more slipped through his fingers. The debts grew. The bank started calling in the loans he had taken out for the expansion. Veronica, realizing the ship was sinking, jumped overboard. She withdrew her capital, dissolved the partnership, and then sued him for creating a hostile work environment. The stress began to take its toll. Michael developed heart problems, had to undergo an emergency angioplasty, and was put on an endless list of medications. He was alone, sick, and broke. Everything he had built was crumbling, and he had no one to blame but himself. It was his lawyer who suggested he find a caregiver agency to help him during his post-surgery recovery. Michael, too proud to ask for help, but all too aware of his limitations, agreed. He called the recommended agency, expecting an unknown voice on the other end of the line. But when the call was answered, he heard a voice he knew too well. "Good afternoon, caring hands. This is Sarah speaking. How can I help you?" Michael hung up immediately, his heart pounding, not from his heart condition, but from pure shock. Sarah. She worked at the company he had just called. Of the thousands of caregiver agencies in New York, he had called that one. He tried calling another agency, but their next availability was 3 weeks away. He needed help now. His children, on the weekends he saw them, were too young to help him with basic things like showering or changing dressings. With his pride wounded but out, to have options, he called again. This time he didn't hang up. "Good afternoon, caring hands." "Sarah, it's me, Michael." Silence. Then her voice, professional and cold. "Yes, what do you need?" "I need a caregiver. I had heart surgery and I'm recovering." "I see. I'll check availability and send someone over. What's the address?" He gave her the address of the apartment where he now lived, a much smaller and more modest place than the house he had shared with Sarah. She took down the information, said she would send a professional the next day at 3 p.m., and hung up. When Michael opened the door for the caregiver the next day, he was expecting a stranger. But it was Sarah standing there, in an impeccable professional uniform, carrying a bag with medical supplies and wearing a neutral expression that revealed nothing. "I thought you were sending someone else," he said, his voice weak. "I'm the best professional available, and you're just another patient. Shall we begin?" She walked into the apartment without waiting for permission, assessed the environment with a clinical eye, and got to work. She checked his vital signs, examined his dressings, and made notes on a chart, all with an impersonal efficiency that was more painful for Michael than any open hostility. "Sarah, I wanted to say that—" "No," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "Here, you are not my ex-husband. You are my patient, and I do not mix my work with personal matters. You will pay for my services like everyone else. There are no privileges, no discounts, and definitely no inferiority. Here, we are equals. You need me, and I provide a service. It's a professional transaction. Understood? Michael nodded, feeling for the first time in years something he hadn't felt since There was a young man. Shame. A deep, corrosive shame that burned more than any physical pain. Sarah took care of him for 3 weeks. She was punctual, competent, and attentive to his medical needs, but completely distant in every other respect. She didn't talk about the past, didn't respond to his pathetic attempts to apologize, and showed no anger or resentment. It was as if he were just another job to be done, another task to be completed. And that indifference hurt more than any shouting ever could. On her last visit, when the dressings were removed and Michael was medically cleared, he tried one last time. "Sarah, please, let me talk. Let me tell you that I was wrong, that I regret everything I said and did." Sarah packed her equipment into her bag, zipped it up, and faced him for the first time with emotion in her eyes. But it wasn't the emotion he expected. It wasn't anger or hurt. It was something worse. It was pity. "Michael, you didn't destroy me. You just forced me to rebuild myself better, stronger, and more aware of my own worth. And you know what I discovered? That you were never on my level. It wasn't me who was inferior, it was you. You were the one who couldn't see what you had. You were the one who destroyed something good because your ambition was bigger than your character. Now, you don't matter anymore. You're just another patient I've treated and will never see again. Take care of yourself, and if you need anything, hire someone else, because my work with you is done." She walked out of the apartment without looking back, leaving Michael alone with the weight of his choices. 2 years had passed since that last encounter with Michael. 2 years that had transformed Sarah into someone she never imagined she could become. The partnership in caring hands had flourished in ways that surpassed her wildest dreams. What had started as a modest post-operative care service for medical tourists had expanded into something much larger. Sarah had a clear vision: to create a protocol of humanized care that went beyond technical competence. She wanted every patient to feel at home, even when they were thousands of miles away from their families. To achieve this, she personally trained every caregiver who joined the company, sharing not only medical knowledge, but also teaching empathy, human connection, and the importance of looking someone in the eye and truly seeing the person behind the illness. The results were extraordinary. Patients not only recovered faster under the care of Sarah's team, but they also returned to their countries and became ambassadors for the service. They recommended it to friends, family, and acquaintances. The demand grew so much that the company had to hire more professionals, open a second office, and expand to other U.S. cities. Sarah now owned a 40% stake in the company. She earned a fixed salary that was 3 times what she had made as a nurse, plus a share of the profits that reached figures she had never imagined possessing. But more important than the money was the recognition. Her name was on the company's legal documents. She was consulted on all major decisions. She was respected, valued, and heard. The house in Astoria, which she had almost lost, was now completely renovated. She kept her mother's jasmines, but added a larger garden with flowers of every color. The backyard became a play area for Leo and Sophia, with a swing hanging from the old tree and a small vegetable patch where they grew tomatoes and lettuce. Leo was now 11, a smart boy who excelled in school and had inherited his mother's capacity for caring for people. He was gentle with his younger sister and patient with the elderly people who sometimes visited the house when Sarah brought home case files to review. Sophia, at 7, was an explosion of energy and creativity, constantly drawing and dreaming of becoming an artist when she grew up. Michael saw them on alternate weekends, fulfilling the court agreement mechanically. He always arrived on time, took the children on expensive outings he could no longer comfortably afford, and brought them back with gifts that tried to compensate for his emotional absence. Leo was polite but distant with his father. Sophia still had that innocent childhood love, but she was beginning to notice that there was something wrong with the way her father spoke about her mother, always with a tone of poorly disguised bitterness. Michael's clinics had closed down. The first one, which had done well for years, couldn't withstand the weight of the second one's debts. He had to declare bankruptcy, lost everything he had built, and now worked as a salaried doctor in a private clinic owned by someone else, earning a fixed salary with no autonomy. It was exactly the kind of life he had so despised, the life of someone who worked for others. Sarah learned of this through mutual acquaintances, but felt neither joy nor sadness at his downfall. She felt only indifference. Michael was a closed chapter in her life, a lesson learned, a scar that no longer hurt. What truly mattered now was the future she was building, and that future was about to reach a level she had never imagined. It was on a Monday morning that Jessica walked into Sarah's office with a special glint in her eyes and a white envelope in her hands. "Sarah, you need to see this." Sarah was finishing up a report on a Chilean patient who had just been discharged, but she dropped everything when she saw her partner's expression. "What is it?" "It's a letter from the International Medical Tourism Congress. They want to honor you." "Honor me?" Jessica opened the envelope and read aloud, the emotion clear in every word. "Dear Ms. Sarah Williams, it is with great pleasure that we inform you that you have been selected to receive the Medal of Honor for Humanized Care in Medical Tourism during the opening ceremony of the 15th International Congress, to be held in Buenos Aires, Argentina. This distinction recognizes your exceptional contribution to raising the standards of care and empathy in the sector, transforming not only the lives of patients, but also inspiring professionals around the world." Sarah felt her legs go weak. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling. A Medal of Honor, an international recognition. She, the nurse who had been called inferior, who had been discarded for being too old, who had been made invisible for years, was being internationally recognized for her work. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. "Say you'll accept," Jessica smiled. "Say you'll get up on that stage and show the whole world who you are." "I will," Sarah said, her voice growing firmer. "I will." The weeks leading up to the Congress were a whirlwind of preparations. Sarah needed a suitable dress for the ceremony, something elegant, but that represented her. She went with Jessica to a shop on Madison Avenue, an expensive boutique she would never have dared to enter years ago. The saleswoman greeted them with smiles and attention, showing options, suggesting colors, and adjusting fits. Sarah tried on several dresses, but it was when she put on an emerald green one with an elegant cut that flattered her figure without being over the top that she knew it was the one. It was sophisticated, professional, and powerful. It was her. "It's perfect," Jessica said, her eyes welling up. "You look beautiful." Sarah looked at her reflection in the store's three-way mirror and for a moment saw two overlapping images. The woman of today, strong, confident, successful, wearing a $3,000 dress without flinching, and the woman of the past, broken, humiliated, buying a cheap dress downtown and being made invisible at her ex-husband's clinic opening. Both were her, and she needed to honor both, the one who suffered and the one who conquered. The trip to Buenos Aires was the first time Sarah had ever left the country. Leo and Sophia stayed with Mrs. Davis, the neighbor who had become like a grandmother to them, and Sarah boarded the plane with Jessica, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Buenos Aires was a vibrant city, full of history and culture. They stayed at a hotel in the Recoleta neighborhood, and Sarah spent her free afternoons walking the streets, admiring the architecture, and chatting in her imperfect but functional Spanish with street vendors, waiters, and sidewalk artists. She bought gifts for the children, an illustrated book about tango for Sophia and a River Plate soccer ball for Leo. She ate empanadas in a small cafe, drank a Malbec wine in a restaurant overlooking the river, and for the first time in years felt completely free. Free from the past, free from the pain, free from the man who had once made her believe she was worthless. The night of the ceremony arrived on a rainy Friday. The Congress was being held at the Alvear Palace Hotel, a place of unimaginable luxury with crystal chandeliers, red carpets, and walls adorned with works of art. Professionals from all over the world were present: doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, and healthcare entrepreneurs. Sarah put on the emerald green dress, let her hair down in soft waves, and wore subtle makeup that highlighted her brown eyes. She looked at herself in the hotel room mirror and took a deep breath. She was ready. The main ballroom was packed when she and Jessica entered. There were at least 500 people seated at round tables, chatting animatedly in various languages. The stage was set up at the far end, with a huge screen displaying the Congress logo and photos of all the night's honorees. Sarah's photo was there, large, clear, professional. She had never felt so seen in her entire life. The ceremony began with speeches from industry leaders. They spoke about the importance of medical tourism, technological advancements, and ethical challenges. And then came the awards. 5 people were to be recognized that night. 3 world-renowned doctors, a researcher who had developed a revolutionary post-operative recovery protocol, and Sarah. The only nurse, the only woman, the only representative from the Americas. When her name was announced, when the spotlights turned to her and 500 people rose to their feet to applaud, Sarah felt an emotion so intense she could barely breathe. She walked onto the stage with steady steps, even as her legs trembled inside, and received the medal from the hands of the International Association's president. It was a heavy medal, made of real silver, with an inscription that read, "For excellence in humanized care and exceptional dedication to human dignity in medical tourism." She hung the medal around her neck and turned to the microphone. The speech she had so carefully prepared over the past few weeks suddenly felt inadequate. The words she had rehearsed didn't capture what she truly wanted to say. So she took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. "Good evening, everyone. I'm not sure I'll be able to speak without crying, so I apologize in advance if the tears come. A few years ago, I was a broken woman. I had lost everything. My money, my home, my dignity, my identity. I was called inferior by someone who was supposed to love me. I was made invisible, discarded, forgotten, and I believed it. I believed I was worthless, that I had nothing to offer, that I was too old and outdated to start over." The audience was in absolute silence. Jessica, sitting in the front row, wiped away tears that were flowing freely. But then, something happened. I started caring for people. The elderly mostly. People who, like me, had been forgotten by the world. And in caring for them, I began to heal myself. Every smile I received, every thank you I heard, was like a brick being laid in the reconstruction of the woman I am today. And I realized something fundamental. Our worth is not determined by those who abandon us. Our worth is determined by how we get back up after we fall. Spontaneous applause began to ripple through the crowd, but Sarah raised a hand, asking for a moment to continue. "This medal isn't just for me. It belongs to every woman who was called inferior and chose to believe in herself. It belongs to every person who lost everything and started from scratch. It belongs to all the healthcare professionals who understand that caring for people goes far beyond technical knowledge. It's about seeing the humanity in every patient. It's about restoring dignity in moments of vulnerability. It's about remembering that all of us at some point will need someone to treat us with kindness when we are weak." She paused, looking out at the audience, seeing emotional faces, people nodding, others wiping away tears. And for anyone going through a difficult time right now, for anyone who feels invisible or inferior, I want to say this: you are not what was done to you. You are not the cruel words that were said about you. You are not the abandonment you suffered. You are your ability to rise again. You are your resilience. You are your future, not your past. And that future can be far brighter than you can ever imagine. The ballroom erupted in applause. The people stood up again, this time in a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. Sarah walked off the stage with the medal heavy around her neck and her heart light for the first time in years. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached her. They wanted to talk, take photos, and ask for advice on how to implement humanized protocols in their own institutions. Sarah spoke with each one, shared her experience, gave out her contact information, and offered her help. It was when she was about to leave the ballroom, tired but happy, that she saw a familiar face in the crowd. Her heart froze for a second. It was Michael. He was there, at the back of the room, wearing a suit that had seen better days, his face marked by time and stress. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, but it seemed to be a mix of regret, admiration, and sadness. Sarah considered turning her back and leaving. She considered ignoring him completely, just as he had ignored her for years. But then she remembered the words she had just spoken on stage, about dignity, about restoring humanity in moments of vulnerability. She walked toward him, her head held high, the medal shining under the ballroom lights. "Michael," she said, her voice neutral, "what are you doing here?" He swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable. "I came for the Congress. I'm representing the clinic where I work now. I didn't know you would be here. I didn't know about the award until I saw your name in the program." Sarah nodded. "I see." He looked at the medal, then into her eyes. "Sarah, I saw your speech. I heard every word. And I need to tell you that I was wrong. Completely, absolutely wrong. You were never inferior. I was the one who was too small to see what I had." She studied him for a moment, seeing the broken man he had become. She felt no anger, no satisfaction. At his downfall, she felt only a deep peace, the peace of someone who has completely healed. "Michael, I've already forgiven you, not for you, but for me, because carrying anger would only hurt me, and I chose to heal. You taught me valuable lessons, even if it was in a painful way. You taught me that my worth doesn't depend on the recognition of others. You taught me that I am capable of rebuilding myself on my own. You taught me that the best revenge isn't to destroy the one who hurt you, but to become so happy and successful that they become irrelevant to your story." He nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're an incredible woman, Sarah. You always were. I was just too blind to see it. Take care of yourself, Michael, and be a better father to Leo and Sophia. They deserve that. They deserve to have a father who is present not just physically, but emotionally too." "I'll try," he promised. "I'll be better." Sarah gave a final nod and turned away, walking toward the exit where Jessica was waiting. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. That chapter was definitively closed. The flight back to New York was smooth. Sarah spent most of the time looking out the window, watching the clouds below, thinking about everything she had lived through, about all the versions of herself that had existed over the years. The dedicated nurse, the deceived wife, the desperate single mother, the resilient caregiver, the successful entrepreneur, the internationally awarded woman. All of those women were her, and they were all important. When the plane landed at JFK, when she saw Leo and Sophia running toward her in the arrivals hall, with huge smiles and open arms, Sarah knew she had arrived where she needed to be. "Mommy!" Sophia shouted, jumping into her arms. "You're back! We missed you!" Leo, more reserved but equally emotional, hugged her waist tightly. "Mrs. Davis said you won a big award. Is it true?" Sarah knelt, getting down to their level, and took the medal out of her bag. She placed the ribbon around both of their necks at the same time, letting them hold it together. "It's true. But you know what's more important than the award? It's knowing that I made it, that I didn't give up even when everything seemed impossible, and that you two were my biggest motivation. Everything I did to show you that we can rise up from anything, that we can turn pain into strength, that we can be so much more than what others say we are." "You're the best mom in the world," Leo said, his eyes shining with pride. "And the bravest," Sophia added. Sarah hugged them both tightly, feeling the medal pressed between their bodies, a symbol of all she had accomplished, but knowing that the real prize was right there, in those hugs, in that unconditional love, in the family she had protected and sustained, even through the hardest times. She looked at Jessica, who was watching the scene with an emotional smile, and then looked around the airport, at the people rushing with their suitcases, at the screens showing destinations all over the world, at the vastness of possibilities that life still had to offer. Sarah was 46 years old. She had 2 wonderful children. She had a successful company. She had international recognition. She had a home full of love. She had jasmines blooming in her backyard. But more important than all of that, she had herself back. And this time she would never get lost again. Sometimes, she thought as she walked hand in hand with her children toward the parking garage, with Jessica carrying her suitcase and chatting excitedly about the company's next projects, Sometimes the best revenge isn't to destroy the one who hurt you. It's to prove with dignity, resilience, and success that they were never on your level, and that they lost the chance to be part of something truly special. Sarah looked one last time at the New York sky, grey and polluted as always, but which at that moment seemed like the most beautiful sky she had ever seen. She smiled, squeezed her children's hands, and moved forward, because that's what she did. She always moved forward, and she always would. Dear listeners, we hope Sarah's story has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, of a woman who was called inferior but proved to be extraordinary, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Was it Michael's cruel betrayal, the moment Sarah professionally cared for him after everything, or perhaps the final victory with the international medal? Every day we bring intense and real stories like this one, revealing the incredible strength that exists within each of us when we decide not to give up. Stories that show that the end of something can be the beginning of something much greater. We'll see you in the next episode with a new story that will make you reflect on courage, dignity, and the power of rebuilding. Until then, remember, you are worth so much more than anyone who ever tried to diminish you could ever imagine.